Hey there, if anyone ends up joining me, I am going to paint some watercolor dinosaurs this afternoon. I'm hoping to use them for Levi's birthday invitations, but ultimately I'd also like to make an invitation template with them that I can upload to my website. And maybe some other mamas out there will find it useful for their little one's birthday parties coming up. So I'm gonna try to see if I can tune in also on my iPad over here in case anyone joins and comments, because I'm about to switch this camera around to face my desk so you can see what I'm doing. Okay. All right. So there's my light pad. And let me see if I can get this to flip around. Because I don't really want it in portrait mode. I apologize because this is my first time doing this, so things get, this is all new to me. I'm trying to figure it out. I can't rotate my phone while recording. Well, that's kind of dumb, isn't it? Okay, so I guess we're kind of stuck with this angle then. Oh well, lesson learned, right? We'll figure it out. Okay. Gonna get this all set up on my iPad. All right. So, let me walk you through what I have here. Got my light box. The brand name is Daylight. Got this for my birthday actually a few years ago up in Cincinnati, and I gotta tell you, I get a lot of use out of it. It is a game changer versus trying to like trace something on a window. So as you can see, it gets pretty bright, and if I hold down this button, I can change the brightness level. So that's pretty nice. And then these are my dinosaur themed images that I'm going to use to trace onto my watercolor paper. And how I created these was I ended up using a bunch of reference images and kind of piecing together the various elements to complete the individual element itself, like this dino print. Looked at some reference images and kind of drew in some blobs and refined it with this velociraptor. I looked at some reference images and took some of the form work from different images and then kind of tweaked it to my liking. So ultimately, when I go to trace this, where you're seeing the white space on the design, there will be white space with the final watercolor. I'm hoping that will make it look a little bit more modern, because that's one of the styles that I kind of tend to gravitate toward. So we have a bunch of these guys here. The Stegosaurus is going to be really cool because his spines, I think I'm going to paint different colors. And then this guy, the Eusocephalus, something like that. I don't remember his exact name, but he's pretty cool too. He's going to have a lot of colors on him. Brachiosaurus. Yeah, so with that being said, I'm going to probably work with the dinosaur footprints first, because I think think this is going to be the most simple. So if anyone's really curious about this process and might want to replicate it themselves, this would be a good one to practice on. To keep this in place, I usually just like to tape it down with some washi tape. Just helps things not slide around too much when I'm tracing. So go ahead and tape this guy down. Because this is super cheap computer paper, it's bubbling a little bit from the ink, so I'm probably also going to tape these sides down as well. And get our watercolor paper. Because I'm going to be using these for graphic design purposes. Uh-oh, I just made a mess. Because I'm using it for graphic design purposes, the quality of the paper really doesn't matter all too much. So I'm going with a pretty cheap paper. I'm going to use my Canson Montval watercolor. This is 140 pound, 9 by 12. This should fit pretty nice over the over these dino prints here. I'm just gonna tear out a sheet. Sorry, I guess I probably should have already had a watercolor paper prep. That would have been nice, right? So go ahead and get that going. Alright. Whew, made a mess, like I said. Had to clean up there for a minute. And now we will tape this guy down. I wish that I could have some music playing in the background because I think that would probably help fill the silence a little bit better. Especially since this is my first time doing this, I feel a little camera shy. I'm not quite sure what to say. And I think music would just kind of help me relax and break up that silence a little bit, but due to potential copyright issues, I don't really want to try to get into that. All right, so I think I'm ready to trace. What I have here in terms of tracing materials is I have a lead pencil here. I don't know particularly what this brand is. I've had this pencil for years, probably like since architecture school. The most important thing to note here though is that it is a 3H lead. And that stands for the hardness of the lead. The higher up the number into the H's you get, the harder the lead is. And then if you go higher into the B's, the softer it is. And so this is a fairly hard lead. It's not the hardest lead that I have. I like this particular hardness because it just allows me to see the lines pretty well as I draw without making super dark marks. Because the thing is with watercolor, you're gonna see the pencil lines at the end if you're not careful to keep your lines light. So I'm just gonna trace this outline here. And this part is pretty relaxing. And I'm not gonna be too super precious about the outlines because you'll see as we start to color this in, the watercolor is going to do its own thing with the outlines, depending on how much pigment I use, and it's just gonna create this really beautiful effect with pigments as I go. So this is really more just for guidance. So generally speaking, as I'm pushing the water and the pigments around, I know about where to stop. And if you're looking for the actual watercoloring part, yeah, this is kind of the boring part of this setup, but that's okay, because you'll see if we have a better guide of where to put the color, it just makes the actual watercoloring part of this so much more enjoyable. Just less thinking involved, so to speak. You can just watch the colors bleed and blend and have a lot of fun with that. Not be so worried about, am I getting the shape right? We've already done the hard work of setting the shape. Okay, so I have my line work here. It's pretty light, but even though it is already pretty light, I like to go ahead and take a kneaded eraser after I'm done tracing and just kind of go over everything pretty lightly and help pick up any excess lead on the page and keep those lines really nice and light. To double check this, I'm even going to turn my light box off, because then that really gives you a good sense of how dark those lines really are. And I'm just kind of pressing the kneaded eraser into the areas where I see that the pencil's a little darker. You can also do a scrubbing motion. The nice thing about the kneaded eraser is it does not shed little pieces like a normal eraser does. So you can like really kind of scrub, and you're not going to have any little pieces that come off as you do it. I used to use a kneaded eraser like this when I was drafting in architecture school, hand drafting, which by the way, you don't really do anymore. But we learned how to do it because my professor was really insistent that we learn. And I agree with his thought process, which was that you're gonna learn a lot about line weights and how shapes get constructed if you have to do it by hand. So when you go and translate that into a program like AutoCAD, you have a better idea of how to, say, like construct an arc. Because it's not as simple as just drawing an arc. You have to figure out what your center point is and radius and all that stuff. So anyway, and then for getting into the really fine parts where you want to erase, I find this Tombow Mono Zero eraser is super great. It is really teeny tiny in terms of the width, and so you can really get super precise with the erasing and get into those really tiny little spots. We didn't really need to do that with this, but I thought I'd show it to you anyway, because like I said, I think it's a really cool little tool that I find I use a lot. Okay, so I think we're ready to start getting some watercolor on the page. I have a few little marks and dust on the page. You know, I'm really not going to get too precious about it because like I said, I'm using it for graphic design purposes, so I'm gonna end up scanning this in and use the final scan to actually create the dino template. So I can always edit things in Photoshop after the fact. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and take this off of my light box because I think I'm probably gonna end up turning the page around quite a bit while I paint. It'll just be easier to do that if it's on my desk and not attached to this light box. Okay. I gotta slide the light box through. Okay. Sorry, being kind of noisy right now. All right. I'm gonna show you what watercolors I'm working with today. I got this new set for Christmas actually. I have yet to use it, so this is gonna be my first time. This is a core set. I forget the specific name of this set, but it's all very bright colors. Included a nice color chart here of all of the core colors available. The really cool thing about core watercolors, my understanding is that they have these really unique blending properties where the pigment really likes to just fan out and blend really quickly, do these beautiful blooms and things. So, so I'm hoping we're gonna have happen today. We will see. Like I said, this is my first time using these watercolors and also just using core watercolors in general. Another tool that I have here today is I have this really cool ceramic watercolor palette that I also got for Christmas. And it has all of these different sized wells where you can mix your colors. And with watercolor, you really want to have various options with each shade in terms of how much pigment to water, the ratio that you're working with. So this is a nice palette for mixing up all of those things. I'm gonna have that over to the side with me. Hopefully you can see what I'm doing over there. I also have, two water cups with me. I have this regular just plastic cup that I got from the Shamrock Shuffle up in Cincinnati, just filled with water. That is my backup cup because my main cup is this cool doodad. This is the paint puck, and my only complaint about this is that it doesn't hold enough water. It's just, I wish it held a little bit more water and then I could just use the one cup. But it's still cool. I really love it because it gets the paint off of your brush really well because of those little like finger things in the bottom of it. It also has brush holders here on the side where you can put your brush to let it dry. And it also has these areas around the inside rim where you can scrape excess paint off. So that's also a really nice feature. So we're going to be using this too. All right, for the dino prints, I was kind of thinking we'd go with like greens and yellows today. That's just how I'm feeling. So I have here the cobalt teal. I'm gonna put a little bit of this in my palette. Probably gonna put it in a larger well that I can pull from. I can always put more of this out if I need it, but generally speaking, we're gonna just put a fairly small amount. In fact, that was probably way too much, considering we're just painting these little dino prints. But the nice thing about watercolors, it can be reactivated. So if this dries on my palette, it's really not a huge deal. No biggie. All right, and I'll put some yellow. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention, this is the core green gold that I'm putting over here in this part of my palette. All right, One other thing that I like to do as I'm getting ready to paint is I will swatch my colors out beforehand, just to kind of get a sense of what they're gonna look like when I lay them down on the page. I'm using here my black velvet, silver black velvet brush, size 6. I really love this brush. It has a nice pointed tip. Allows me to get really detailed with my strokes if I want to, but also I can lay down a nice bit of color. So that's really nice. Go ahead and add some more water to my brush, and I'll put the excess over here in a separate well. So you can see we get this really nice cobalt color. We have like a medium consistency and then a lighter consistency. All right, now let's check out this green gold real quick to see what that looks like. Another nice thing about these silver black velvet brushes is they hold a lot of water. And when you're painting with watercolors, you definitely want that. I wouldn't say these hold as much as some, but definitely a good amount. All right, I'm gonna do the same thing and just add some extra water to my brush and put the excess in a separate well over here. Okay, so this green gold is, not sure if that's exactly what I was picturing, but we'll see. Let's just see how this turns out. And because I'm curious how these two mix, I'm gonna go ahead and mix some up over here in my palette. We'll see how these two play with each other. If they play nice or not. Okay, so this gives us like a nice kind of deeper green color. So that's cool. That's pretty interesting. I feel like that's one of the fun things about watercolors is you just never know. You never know how the pigments are going to react. I mean, I guess maybe if you've been painting for a long time and you have a lot of experience under your belt, using certain pigments, you might be able to predict. But for me personally, I would still consider myself, maybe like an intermediate watercolorist. So I don't have that extensive a knowledge of the different pigments and how they react with each other. Okay, so I think looking at this, I'm gonna try to avoid using the green gold in its like super pigmented form, because that particular hue is not really what I'm going for today. So I think I'm gonna stick mostly with this cobalt and a little bit of the green gold. One other color I'm gonna add to our palette that I think is gonna come in handy perhaps is some of this purple color. This is the dioxazine purple. I think this is gonna look pretty nice mixed with the cobalt. So let's see how that looks. A little bit more water. Ooh, you can kind of see, I don't know if you can see on, got way too much pigment for this purple, by the way, but in this green color where my finger is, the yellow is really starting to bloom out from this corner and creating some really nice granulation. That's really interesting. I'm gonna be really curious to see what happens as we paint these footprints here. Okay, yeah, so this dioxazine purple is about what I expected. I think it's gonna play really nice with the cobalt. And then with the yellow, so purple and yellow are complementary colors. It's probably gonna make like a gray. So I'm gonna try to avoid having these two super close to each other. I'll probably do some blue into yellow, back into blue, and then into purple, kind of go along that way to hopefully not muddy up our colors too much. So anyway, all right, got our little swatch card done. Let's go ahead and just start painting, y'all. I'm gonna go in with this cobalt, start there, and start with this little claw here. What I'm gonna do is start with the blue like that, and then start to work in some yellow on my brush. You want the paper to be wet, but not like super wet. You want it to still be pliable. Not pliable, that's not the right word. You don't want it to be soaking. You want the water to fill those pores on the page, but not have giant puddles of water sitting, if that makes sense. So I'm gonna go ahead and dip right back into my palette here. We'll start on this toe. And if you feel like you have too much water in any one spot, you can always dab your brush into a paper towel. I have some paper towels up here. Dry it off and then come back in with your dry brush, and your dry brush will just soak up that extra water. Whoops, see, went back in with too much water there. And then essentially when you're painting larger areas like this, you just take your puddle that's there that you're working on, and you just kind of push the water and the pigment around to form that shape that you're going after. So that's how watercolor is kind of different from some other mediums, where I mentioned earlier that the form when you're painting with watercolor can get, so you have to think about the form and the mixing of the colors, and sometimes that's just too much to think about all at once. It just is more enjoyable for me if I don't have to think about what form I need to push the puddle into, and instead can focus on playing with the colors. And so I'm just trying to change up where I grab my pigment from, which well. Does it have a little more yellow in it? Does it have a little more cobalt in it? We'll get to the purple, but I'm thinking the purple is probably going to be closer to the heel part of this dino print, just because that's not the color that I'm really working with right now. There's not enough room to do that gradient in these smaller areas. All right, so on to the larger portion of this print. Probably use a larger brush for this portion just to help lay down color a little faster. I do have a size 10, but it's been a little while since I've done any serious watercolor, so I'm a little hesitant because I feel like I'm just gonna be like, whoa, calm down, Jennifer. You're laying on that watercolor way too thick. All right, let me grab some of this pure yellow, because I think that'll look really nice up here at the top. Blend in really nice as we kind of go up from that more yellowy green color. And then kind of want to get back down here and get some more back into that cobalt color, and try to get it before this edge dries, so we don't have a super stark bleed going on, or bloom, I guess depending on what you call it. Down here towards the bottom is kind of where I was thinking I would start to work in some purple. Kind of deepen up that cobalt a little bit. I'm trying to work pretty quickly here. Like I said, we want to try to limit our edges drying too much. Now what'll be really interesting to see is how this core watercolor dries, with having some of those edges in it. Like I can see there's one forming there. It might be pretty cool. It might also might look weird, I don't know. It's kind of the beauty of watercolors, you just never know. Never know what you're gonna get. Got a lot of water over in this section, so I'm gonna dry off my brush. Try to work in some more of that yellow. Okay, so that's one done. Let's move over here to the other one. I think with this one, I'm gonna maybe go the opposite and start with the purple up here. Mix that with some, need to mix some cobalt and purple. Oh yeah, nice. Nice deep blue kind of color. cobalt. And if you do see a line starting to form, you can take a wet brush and scrub it before it completely dries, and that kind of will help keep that line from getting really stark. Mix up some more light purple over here. Okay, it's maybe a little too light. And that's too much water. There we go. Perhaps some of this deep blue. Finish that off with some cobalt. Okay. Moving on to the main portion of the print. So I'd say in general, most watercolor artists tend to use this method that I'm using here, where you start at one section and kind of let go. What am I trying to say? You start at one piece and work your way through versus jumping around all over the place because of that edge that I've been talking about. And you can see over on this other print where that edge really did form in the pigments. That's okay. I think I can probably fix that, or at least make it not look so crazy. I'm just gonna go back over it again once we're done with this print that I'm working on. Can usually, if it's a high quality pigment, you can usually pick it back up again with some water. And the pigment will lift and you can kind of re-situate it and let it dry, and it usually will look a little bit better. If you're going for like that look where you intentionally do blooms, maybe you leave it. Maybe you just let it be, because I mean, it is kind of cool. Looks like my internet is having issues or something. I see the video feed is like kind of cutting in and out. So I went in with a lot of purple pigment there. But we'll let that go and just kind of see what it does. Go ahead and re-wet this area though. And And so to avoid what happened over on the other side, I am reglazing this side to try to make sure that that edge gets wet again, and I can blend the pigments out. Because there's just so much cobalt over here in this section, I'm gonna just add some purple pigment, and we're gonna let that just blend on the page. Another nice thing about, putting this through Photoshop is I can ultimately change the colors of this if I really want to. So depending on what the theme colors are, maybe I decide that I want to do something with reds instead. Well, yeah, I can change the hue in Photoshop and no biggie. Alright, so now that we're getting kind of towards the bottom here, I'm gonna try to work in some more of that yellow. So it's kind of the opposite of the other print, where we have that warm yellow in the heel instead of up at the toes. Might have been a little too much yellow pigment, so I'm actually gonna pick some of that up, because I think that maybe is looking a little weird to me in terms of the color tones. Yeah, that's a little more subtle. Come back over to this one here and see if I can do a bit of glazing and work out this line. All I'm doing is I'm just essentially re-wetting the whole thing to try to get rid of those weird dry lines. They weren't in a very flattering place, in my opinion. Oh, that's just me. Like I said, you can kind of scrub that pigment a little bit to try to help break it up in those paper grooves. And then once you feel like you've got a good handle on that pigment and getting rid of that funky line, just take some clean water and just go back over everything to smooth it out and blend. And try to do it without getting your hand in the wet paint that's on your right. Oh, that was way too much water. Okay, yeah, that one's looking better now. I like how this is starting to dry on this side. See one other weird little spot in the toe here that I'm gonna go ahead and see if I can fix. I'm just using the same technique where I scrubbed the pigment to kind of get it loose again, and then just wet the surface of this area and let the pigment redistribute. And ideally you're fixing anything like that before the page is completely bone dry. It can be a little dry, but the paint, as long as you're not seeing any shiny surface, but it's not bone dry and cold to the, or I'm sorry, not, when it's cold to the touch, that means it's still wet, but if it's room temperature, then you're fine. That's the ideal spot, the ideal timing to try to fix any mistakes like that. I'm gonna hop back over to this right one again and add in a little bit more pigment on the top of this toe print. It's just looking a little light to me up there. Wanted to have a little bit more color. That was maybe a little too much color. Once again, no biggie, because we can just blend this out a little bit more. Okay. All right, I think we are done with our dinosaur toe prints, and I'm excited to move on to some of these other dinosaur things. I think this raptor would be cool, although this one has a lot of detailed work, so I may save that one for a little bit later once I feel like I've warmed up. This Triceratops would be a nice one to maybe do next. The forms on it are pretty simple, and there's a nice large area to work with. So yeah, I think that's probably what I'll do next. And I'm not sure exactly when that'll be, but hopefully sometime this week. I do have work to do this week, so that kind of takes priority. I hope to do more of this in the future, so we'll see. Wish me luck. All right, well, thanks to those of you that tuned in for a little bit, and I hope you guys are having a fantastic Tuesday. See you later. Bye.